Hello, I'm Scott Wright, live from the Gallup Riverfront campus in Omaha, Nebraska, and this is Gallup's Call to Coach, broadcasting on January 15th, 2016. Call to Coach is a resource for those who want to help others discover and use their strengths. We have Gallup experts and independent strengths coaches share tactics, insights, and strategies to help coaches maximize the talent of individuals, teams, and organizations around the world. If you have questions, comments, or contributions during the live webcast, we have a live chat room available right below the video window you're watching now. Feel free to share your thoughts or questions, and we'll try to work those into the program. If you are listening to the recorded version of this webcast and have questions or you need additional information, please contact Gallup at coaching@gallup.com. You can also catch this and all of our past videos and both the streaming or downloadable audio for offline listening over at coaching.gallup.com. And don't forget to visit gallupstrengthcenter.com for all your coaching resources and training needs. Our regular viewers of Call to Coach typically expect to see Jim Collison in the producer's chair. Well, have no fear, Jim will return next week as he is spending some well-deserved time with his family this week. Today we are pleased to welcome back a familiar face to our coaches, Dean Jones. Dean is the Principal Talent Development Architect for Gallup's learning content and coaching programs and Gallup's preeminent thought leader on talent development and coaching. As we kick off the new year, Dean will join Call to Coach on a reoccurring basis to provide advice and insights from his vast experience in teaching and developing individuals, teams, and organizations. Welcome to the show today, Dean.
Thanks, Scott. I appreciate it.
Yeah, because our coaches are keenly interested in the strengths of others, we always like to start the program by sharing our guests' signature themes. And for you, those are activator, focus, woo, strategic, and relator. And for all our viewers, I'll throw those themes up on the chat room in case you missed them. Dean, today I think we're going to focus on strengths-based development. Is that correct?
That is right. That's right. So for the session today, I thought one of the things, as Scott said, is I will be here probably on a monthly basis in Call to Coach this year. This is something that Scott and Jim and I started talking about. And really my intent in being here is to talk about some of the concepts and constructs that sit behind our courses, our coaching courses, some of the things that we might not in the course of a class be able to drill down into, but to really kind of flesh out some of the things that we think will be interesting and relevant to coaches. Part of today's session, as Scott said, today's session really is about strengths-based development. And in some, on a certain level, you know, I would say that, gosh, everybody who's on this broadcast or watching this broadcast could probably teach a seminar on strengths-based development. But I want to be able to kind of pull out some of the things that we think about when we think about strengths-based development. And some of the things today I think that are kind of misconceptions about strengths and strengths development that when I talk to coaches, when I talk to people who are engaged in strengths development, I notice like everything may have not landed necessarily in a way that we intended or we would say is consistent with our thinking and our research. So I wanted to kind of drill into that topic today. As Scott said today, I'm watching the chat, so I would love for this to be interactive. You know, so questions you've got, comments you've got as we're going through this, would love to have those just so that we know. And like Scott, you know, it looks like there's some familiar faces here. I would love to have your comments and questions as we go through this to make sure that it's really interesting and relevant for you. So I want to dive right in. I want to talk about strengths development. And when we at Gallup think about strengths development, the thing that we really see it as a breakthrough for human development. I know that sounds very grand, kind of breathless, but we really see it as reshaping the way that as human beings we think about development, and that we're reshaping it in a way that is one that's both positive and constructive. It's consistent with what we know is innately, you know, the way that human beings are wired. And also in a way that I think unlocks for us new levels of performance. So there's ways that we think by focusing on strengths-based development, what we're doing, why it's a breakthrough, why is it why is it powerful and not just unique, is because we think it gives people access to new levels of performance. And I think that's an important thing. I think that it's not just that this is different. It's not just that strengths-based development is a different kind of approach or a unique approach, but why it's a powerful approach is that it gives us access to performance in ways that are consistent with our innate talent, so that we're able to actually really capitalize on our talent in a way that's really powerful. I think that's part of when you, as a strengths coach, are out talking to your clients and prospective clients and talking about why me, why this approach, what should we be doing. I think that's part of the benefits. It's not just, hey, this is different. And I know that, and over the next few months, over the next probably 6 months at Gallup, we're doing a lot of research on millennials right now, and we're going to be talking about that millennial research a lot. Strengths-based development is a great fit with how millennials think about and see the world. So I think there's that fit that's really working. But I think also that there's that there's something even more powerful, is the way that we're able to go to be able to really unlock performance. So as we say, it's a breakthrough in human development. I want to talk about why it's sort of a breakthrough too. Well, you've probably all heard that quote about Don Clifton, and I think it's even mounted on the wall in our operations headquarters at the Omaha Riverfront. That Don Clifton assertion about what if we studied what's right with people versus what's wrong with people. One of the reasons that's powerful, and I think it's important to know kind of the context. At the time that Don said that, there's Don as a psychologist and somebody who was a research in human psychology, right? At the time that Don said that, the predominant way of thinking in psychology at the time was really focused on abnormal psychology. So you think at that time what was happening, this is sort of a Freudian or almost post-Freudian kind of era in psychology. The dominant kind of thinking at the time was what makes somebody abnormal, what makes somebody deviant, what makes somebody maladapted in particular ways. And that was where a lot of the thinking and research was going on at that time. So when Don said, hey, what if we studied what's right with people, that assertion was really revolutionary and really different than everything that was happening in psychology at the time, and really opened up this kind of new paradigm for thinking about not just how are people maladapted or how are people abnormal, but what's right with people, and how do we study what makes people great, what gives people access really to excellence. I think it's an important piece that we talk about, and I think it's important that you as strengths coaches are talking about this a lot, that strengths is really synonymous with performance excellence. So this notion of excellence, sometimes I think that in strengths coaching, we tend to focus a lot on awareness building, right? So do I know what my talents are? Do I understand my talents like that? As opposed to thinking about that really the coaching that's happening is about the application of talent. It's really about how we're applying talent in a way that yields performance. There's that great quote from Don where he talked about, and I think this sort of anchors strengths, that excellence is the manifestation of talent through practice and learning. And when Don was studying strengths, he was really, his access in really was looking at excellence. He was looking at the application of talent in a way that yielded superior world-class performance. So, and when we define strengths, we even define strengths as the consistent near-perfect results in a particular area. So I think it's an important thing that we know that as a strengths coach, that what you're coaching really is performance. Sometimes I think we get hung up kind of coaching talent or coaching awareness around talent, versus that really at the end of the day what we're coaching is we're coaching performance so that it approaches excellence. And that's really where we should be looking at, or where we should be focusing. That talent really just gives us the capacity for excellence. Sometimes when I hear people who've been coached around their strengths talk, sometimes what I hear a lot of times is this kind of confusion around talent and strengths, right? And they've been coached on their strengths, and they'll say proudly, gosh, I've got a strength in a particular area, but what they mean is not really that they've got results in those areas. What they really mean is that they've got what they've got is a concentration of talent in the area, or that the talent's sort of amplified in the area. There's like a great degree of potential in that area because there's a concentration of talent. So I think it's important to kind of separate those things out. I also think that it's important that as we're coaching people to move toward excellence. And this is where I think as strengths coaches, and this may be a tough message for some, that it's so important as a strengths coach that you have domain expertise as well as your expertise, as well as your strengths coaching background. So, I think to be a great, and this is my opinion, right? But I think to be a great strengths coach, right, that it's, on the one hand, you've got to really understand talent and have a love of talent and appreciation from talent, and that by understanding the Clifton Strengths Finder themes, talent themes, it gives you these distinctions in talent, this understanding of talent that you didn't previously have before. On the same time, I think it is important to have domain expertise. It's kind of like, gosh, if you're going to coach somebody who's a world-class musician, first of all, you'd want to understand, is there the presence of talent there, right? Does this somebody really have the potential to be great, right? But at the same time, you'd want to make sure that you really understood music, that you could read music, you could play music, you had really strong domain expertise in the area of music. So I think as you're thinking about your business as a strengths coach, as you think about the work that you do there, I think it's important to be able to identify, gosh, what is my mastery relative to talent and strengths, and what's the domain expertise that I've got? So it may be in the area of finance, could be in the area of pastoral care, could be working with, as we know one of our coaches has, working with people that were recently incarcerated. There may be some level of expertise that you've got in a particular area, but I think those two things together really help somebody to be really successful as a strengths coach. And I think as more people are coaching strengths, it also serves as an important differentiator around the work that you do. So when people point to you, they can say, gosh, this person has lots of wherewithal in the area of talent and strengths. They've also got a lot of domain expertise in the technology industry. And those two things make somebody really well equipped to coach managers and leaders in the technology industry. So it's having those two things together, I think, are super important. The other thing, as we talk about coaching strengths, and as we talk about strengths-based development, and I want to kind of dig into this notion of strengths-based development in a minute here, but the other piece of it is that we know that strengths are transformational. So there's a component to strengths that when somebody starts working in that domain of talent, and they work in that area, we know that it has this transformational impact on people. And I've said this before in certain groups, but by transformational we mean something really specific about that, right? So we mean that by transformational is that somebody's left with new ways of thinking, feeling, and behaving as a function of that. That it provides a new context inside of which they see themselves, inside of which they see others, and inside of which they see their environment. And I think just on a grassroots level that when you're coaching somebody, any strengths coach who's worked with folks could say, gosh, I've seen that happen. I was coaching somebody, and all of a sudden they had that epiphany, that moment of insight where they could say, gosh, I really see myself in a different way. And I think it starts with, as strengths coaches, are having that experience for ourselves. I'll never forget, when I first had a strengths coaching session, and my number one theme, as Scott pointed out at the top of the broadcast, is activator. And being able to really understand what it meant to be an activator, somebody that's got a sense of urgency, somebody that's comfortable taking ideas and moving them into action. When I started to really understand all the traits that roll up to that talent theme, I could really, those things really, it started to give me a new context for my natural talent and the way that I could apply it. It reshaped, in other words, the way that I see myself. And I think those epiphanies are important. And I think, particularly for new coaches, if you are working with people and those people are not having those kind of insights or those epiphanies, I think that's an area where you'd say, gosh, I got to go back and do some more study, because a normal part of of people really mastering strengths is when they start to have those insights, when it starts to shift and reorganize the way they see themselves, the way they see others, the way they see their environment. That's an important piece of it. And I think it comes, the source of that a lot of times is people really having some mastery around those 34 talent themes. You see people, I mean, certainly part of it is when you're coaching people and they recognize pieces that they might have known about themselves. But, and this is an important piece, I think the access to breakthrough performance, the access to where people get excellence, one of the accesses to that, one of the doors into that is being able to have those kind of insights or epiphanies that reorganize the way people see themselves, see others, see their environment. So it is literally through those insights and those epiphanies that people get access to behaving and contributing in new ways. And I think that's an important part of the coaching. So at the top I said, one of the things I said was that strengths development is fundamentally different and more powerful than conventional development. And in the courses that you've all been through, or that most of you have been through, we talk a lot about that distinction between what is strengths development and what is conventional development. I want to take a minute and just kind of revisit that in a way so that I can talk a little bit about each one of those. So in conventional development, as we all know, and to a greater or lesser degree have been through, conventional development is really that kind of gap analysis where we, and you see this in a lot of organizations still, where people really look for, gosh, where are the improvement areas? Where are the performance gaps? Where we would say, gosh, you've got a weakness in a particular area, or performance isn't up to snuff, and we can say, gosh, you know, those are the areas where we would expect you to be able to perform at this level, and you're not able to perform at this level. So we identify all those gaps, and then start to build an improvement plan to train to the gaps. So that's the conventional kind of development approach is, gosh, how are we going to do this? You see this in a lot of organizations that employ competencies, you know, and competencies sometimes people have an issue, you know, competencies are not all bad. They're not all a problem, but sometimes in organizations that have competencies, you see this where you see folks that have, you know, I was thinking of somebody that I know that they showed me the competencies for their role, and they had something like 140 competencies for a particular role, right? And then the gap analysis for development is based on those competencies, and then you're working in tens of areas trying to improve those particular areas. And those, we know that in that conventional development approach, you can, it's not like that there's everything wrong with it. You can get incremental improvement. What you don't get necessarily always is breakthrough performance. So you don't get those levels of performance that are really unprecedented. Your access to excellence, it's not a direct route to excellence. And one of the things you're starting to see is a lot of organizations that are starting to recognize this more and more. The fallacy with this conventional development approach, and I think it's important to just kind of point it out, is there's this thinking that strengths and weaknesses are polar opposites. That strengths and weaknesses are opposites. So the opposite of a weakness is a strength, and, you know, or the opposite of a strength is a weakness. That's actually not the case. And it's important to note that. You don't, by investing in a weakness, you don't end up with a strength. So weaknesses never develop into strengths. The best you can hope for by investing in a weakness is mediocrity. You're never going to get excellence. You're never going to get how we define a strength, consistent near perfect performance, by investing in a weakness. The best you'll get is mediocrity. Conversely, when you invest in an area of strength, a strength will develop infinitely. So if you want access to excellence, you've got to start from looking at what are the areas of strength. How do I identify those areas where there's a talent concentration and start to invest in those areas? So it's a kind of gap analysis in a different way. So if we kind of turn it on our head, we can say, gosh, these are the areas where we would say there's great talent. Now, where's the gap in terms of how we've invested in that area so that we're demonstrating excellence in that area? So it's not looking at what is mediocrity and how do we invest in an area of weakness to bring it up to that level. It's how do we look at those areas of talent, and where do we see excellence demonstrated, and how do we invest in those gaps? One of the things I see a lot is, I will tell you, as I look at people's development plans and as I look at how people are developing those kind of themselves relative to their strengths, I don't see a ton of yet great development plans around strengths. So it's not a common thing that I see as I look at kind of people's development plans. I don't see those great things. A lot of the development plans I see sometimes coming out of coaching sessions are ones that are designed to facilitate greater self-awareness rather than actually help somebody improve performance. And we know this from the work that we've done, if you look at what it takes to build a strength, it's that talent times investment equals a strength, that kind of basic equation. So the things that I always am looking for, and when relative to an individual development plan, is that people, one, that they really understand, first of all, do I understand what are those areas of talent? What are those concentration of talent? What are those areas of talent that are really powerful? And then what are the things as part of the plan that I need to study and learn in order to be able to capitalize on that? What are the techniques I need to develop? So what are the kinds of skills that I need to be practicing, the technique that I need to develop to be able to capitalize on that talent? What are the things I need to practice? So as I develop those kind of skills, what are the things I'm practicing over and over again that help me to be able to approach excellence in that particular area? What are the experiences I need to have? We know this particularly with leaders, as we think about leaders, that that experiential piece is so important. So what are the experiences I need to have? So those 4 questions, I think, are really important questions. What do I need to study and learn? What technique do I need to develop? What do I need to practice? And what do I need to experience to be able to do that? We know that performance really lives in the gap between expectations and excellence. So understanding what's expected of me, understanding where excellence is. So if you're developing strengths in that particular area, it's thinking about the knowledge, the skills, and the experience that help to be able to bridge that gap, to move somebody from being able to meet expectations in a particular area and to be able to approach excellence, right? This expectations thing is really important. If you've read Soar with Your Strengths, one of the cool quotes from Don Clifton in that book is that nothing happens until someone expects something of you in ways you can achieve, right? That there's an expectation consistent with the concentration of your talent. I think one of the questions that is powerful as I've coached people in their strengths, to be able to ask is, what are people counting on you for? Right? What is expected? What are people expecting of you? And there's maybe those explicit expectations, but there's also sort of the implicit expectations that people have. And I think understanding that is a really important piece. The other end of that is that the people that I'm coaching, do those folks have do those folks have a really clear picture of excellence? So do they know what's expected, both implicit and explicit? And at the other hand, do I really know what excellence looks like? So I know what I'm going for. Oftentimes you see in organizations, and you see this a lot in organizations, where people can say some level of what's expected of them. They have some sort of sense of what's expected of them, but it may not be as sharp as it could be or should be. A lot of times you find in organizations, people don't have a great sense of what excellence looks like in their particular role or for a particular project. And understanding that picture of what's expected and what excellence looks like, that's a key to performance. So as we're coaching strengths, as we're coaching the application of talent to approach excellence, both of those things are really important pieces. Let's see where I want to go. Oftentimes, I want to go back to this thing about development plans. Oftentimes, and again, to sharpen up development plans for people. So I'm assuming that as you're working with the people that you coach, that part of what you're putting together for them is sometimes what's called an IDP, an individual development plan, or a plan for being able to develop their strengths. And again, one of the issues I see a lot of times is that the plan tends to be more about self-awareness. It tends to be more about talent identification and talent awareness than it is about performance, right? And it's not that you don't want or need that piece of talent identification and awareness, but that's insufficient then for really realizing, I think, the possibility of strengths. You don't really have a strengths until you've got consistent near perfect results. So if you're coaching somebody for strengths rather than just talent, that self-awareness or talent identification is not enough. It's got to really move into that performance piece. There's four kind of cornerstones that as we think about individual development plans that we think are important around these kind of individual development plans. And these are the things that I think just on an ad hoc basis are really important as you're working with a client and you're thinking about coaching strengths that an individual development plan should conceivably have. One is talent identification. And so it's got that piece, and obviously that starts with the CliftonStrengths Finder. That I've done the CliftonStrengths Finder with my client. I understand, and I understand what are those areas, those areas of talent or those concentration of talent, those signature themes as a starting piece. So the first piece is that talent identification piece. The second thing is that sense of mission and purpose. And again, one of the things that Don said in Source Your Strengths is that I love so much is that mission and purpose are so integral to strengths development. It's really an important piece of that. And it's that we know who we are. We've got that talent identification piece, but at the same time, we know where we're going. Right? So we know who we are. We have a sense of what our inherent talents are. We have a sense of who we are, how we're composed, what our innate gifts are. But at the same time, we understand where we're going. How are we going to apply those? What does that sense of mission and purpose look like? That provides a lot of focus for how we're using or applying our talents in ways that are meaningful. The other two pieces are one is the thing I talked about before, actions to build knowledge, skills, and experience. So do I have a clear sense of what is that pathway? What are those actions that contribute knowledge to my talent so that I'm more informed in a particular way? I've got the right knowledge to be able to bring myself to bear. What are the skills? So what's the technique that I need in order to be effective in that particular area? And then what are the set of experiences that I need that allow me to be effective? So that third piece, is that I'm clear about those actions and that those actions are inside of this framework of that they're consistent with my talent and they help me fulfill on this kind of sense of mission and purpose. So they live between those two things. The fourth and final piece is measurement. That there's some measurement so that I know that I'm making progress. Oftentimes I will tell you, and this is just anecdotal, when I talk to coaches and coaches have difficulty with clients, sometimes it's because there's no inherent measurement, so the client and the coach doesn't really have any sense. Is the client making progress? Is the client moving along in the application of their strengths to become more effective? Are they approaching excellence? So that measurement piece is a really important piece. And there's lots of different ways. And again, going back to kind of domain expertise, there's lots of different ways to be able to measure excellence and effectiveness and to be able to gauge, are we in the right way? One that we use commonly in organizations with managers and leaders is employee engagement. And to be able to measure that, to be able to say, gosh, are we making progress around that? That's a common way that you measure the effectiveness of a manager or leader, is to say, are they creating an engaging culture that will yield them the right level of performance? So the four things for this great individual development plan, again, are talent identification through the CliftonStrengths Finder, some sense of mission and purpose, and some articulation of that I think is really important, so we're all clear what we mean by that. The third thing is actions. What are the actions, the specific actions that we're going to take to build knowledge, to develop skills, to have the right set of experiences that will help us to exhibit excellence at some point in the future, right? And then the fourth thing is measurement. Right? Is there some measurement so we know where are we going, and then what are those milestones along the way look like? So those are things I think as you're putting together individual development plans, those are important pieces. There's one more piece that I want to kind of talk about today as we think about strengths development and coaching people inside of strengths that I think is an important piece. So, and that's really this piece of weaknesses and failures. So many of you may have read the article that came out recently from the gentleman who's the executive with Hogan, talking about strengths-based development and how strengths-based development on some level is dangerous, you know, I think for anybody who read the article who's a strengths coach, one of the fundamental assertions in the article, or one of the fundamental assumptions, is that somehow that when you're a strengths coach, or you're working inside of a strengths-based development frame, that you're not talking about weaknesses or not addressing weaknesses. And anybody who's a trained strengths coach will tell you that's just not true. That's just not the case. I think it's important to know, though, that as strengths coaches, as we start working with people inside of their weaknesses, there's things that we see that as somebody becomes more comfortable with their strengths and more facile with their strengths, that we see. One is there's a point as you start to work with somebody inside of strengths where there's this acknowledgement that they don't have to be well-rounded. I think for a lot of us growing up, for many of us, and maybe this is generational, right? But had this presumption that somehow we needed to be all things to all people. We needed to be well-rounded. One of the milestones you see as you start to work with people instead of a strengths frame is they start to be able to be able to kind of give up being well-rounded. There's this acknowledgement, gosh, I don't have to be a well-rounded person. I do have strengths in a particular area and weaknesses in a particular area. In some ways, and this is why I think there's so much this whole assumption in the Hogan article was not accurate, is in some ways you have more productive and robust conversations about strengths, about weaknesses inside of a strengths framework than you do when you don't have a strengths framework, right? By focusing on strengths, it allows us to have really great conversations about weaknesses, and in fact gives us permission to have weaknesses. So what I find is that as you coach people inside of strengths, there's more permission for people to say, yeah, I do have those weaknesses, and they're more forthcoming in being able to acknowledge those weaknesses and deal with them in a powerful way than inside this presumption that we have to be all things to all people. We in our accelerator course and in our strengths coaching courses, we talk about name it, claim it, aim it, and name it, being able to name our talent themes, being able to really understand what they are, and then claim them is an important piece so that we appreciate them and we understand them. I think equally, people that are being developed inside of the strengths frame claim their weaknesses, and that is as powerful as claiming their strengths. I can say, gosh, this area, I'm not an analytical person. That's not a strength of mine. That's actually an area where I don't have a lot of talent, I don't have a lot of strength, and I'm really now interested in other people that have that as a strength. What's cool about where you see this is you see those milestones when you're coaching somebody where they're able to sort of give up being well-rounded. They can talk openly in a really forthcoming way about their weaknesses and start to really claim those weaknesses. The other piece that they get is they get real interested in other people's strengths. So in those areas where they do have weaknesses or non-talents, to be more rigorous about it, they get fascinated by other people's strengths that are complementary. So, which starts to really open the door for collaboration on a whole nother level. So this notion of weaknesses is really powerful. The one thing I want to differentiate here, though, is the difference between weaknesses and failures. Because sometimes those two things get collapsed together. One of my favorite quotes is this quote from Winston Churchill. He says that success is moving from failure to failure with great enthusiasm. I love that quote. I got that quote early in my career, and I would tell you that it has definitely been a bandage for me at times when I thought I was just an abject failure. I love that quote, and I always imagine that Winston Churchill said that with kind of a twinkle in his eye. He was known for sort of his wry sense of humor. So, I think so I love that quote. I think it's important that we know that failure is actually part of developing strengths. So, as I go along this pathway of developing my talent into strengths, applying my talents in meaningful ways, so I end up with that consistent near-perfect performance, it's not going to be just one giddy high to another. It's not going to be like everything I touch just automatically turns to gold, right? people, when they're mastering something, if you've ever read the George Leonard book, Mastery, I love that book. But if you read that book, one of the things that we know is that people on the pathway to mastery in a particular area have failures. They have good, messy, juicy failures that help them to be able to learn. And so I think sometimes we get failure confused, and particularly when we love talent, we get failure confused with weakness, and they're two different things. So I want to make sure that as we're thinking about that, we can sort of distinguish between what's a great failure on the path to developing a strength versus what's in an area of weakness, right? And so one of the things that we see is with failures, even in those areas of failure that we may be looking at, we still see the presence of talent. So there's things that if you go back to basics, there's things that we could say, gosh, are still present in the failure that have us say, yeah, we're on the right path. So things like glimpses of excellence, things like fast learning, things that we would say, gosh, yeah, we had a miss here, right? But we had a miss in an area where we can tell there's still the presence of excellence, or we can see the glimpses of excellence even in that failure. We can still see that there's fast learning. There's ways that people pick things up quickly that let us know, gosh, we're still working in this area of talent. I'll tell you kind of an example I have that's recent. Last week I was working with our global learning development consultants in Omaha. We had flown in all of our full-time learning and development consultants into Omaha, and we were working with them for a week. And one of the things, and these are the people that lead our courses around the globe. One of the things I can always tell as I'm working with them that I can always tell as I'm coaching them, that even if I may be coaching them and they're not effective in a particular arena, I can tell there's still that presence of excellence. I can still tell that there's that kind of quick learning. There's one gal that I was coaching, this one woman that I was coaching last week. She's a relatively new course leader for us. She's been a consultant with us for a while and just recently became a course leader. I had her in front of the room, and she was delivering a section of the course. And she delivered it. She did a good job. And there were things, though, that we could see would make it much more impactful. So I coached her, and I said to her, okay, great, do it again and incorporate that coaching that I gave you. Now, I'll tell you this funny thing that I notice is when people have talent in that area, and you give them that kind of coaching, they can almost immediately incorporate it. When people don't have talent in that area, they get stuck by that. So I give somebody coaching, we're on the fly, I'm giving coaching. People with talent, that talent to be in front of the room, working with people, immediately they can start to incorporate it. And you notice that kind of talent in other areas, singing talent, acting talent, athletic talent. When a coach gives that person some kind of adjustment, one of the things you're working with somebody who's got talent in that area is they can almost immediately incorporate it. How sometimes you're working with somebody who may not have talent in that area is they get stuck by that, right? So that I've had people where I had in front of the room, and I'd give them some coaching, and I'd say, okay, now can you incorporate that and incorporate that coaching and do it again? And what they oftentimes come back with is, gosh, I need to think about that, or I need to kind of study that, or I need to practice that before I'd be able to do that. That's often a sign maybe that somebody doesn't necessarily have the same intuitive talent in a particular area that they might or should have in that area. So, because a lot of times the difference between kind of failure and weakness is, in the area of failure, it's a miss of calibration, it's a miss of technique, and that when coached, somebody can incorporate it quickly. So let me kind of stop there. Scott, I thought I'd take some questions. I know the chat's been going here, here. I thought maybe I'd take some of the questions from coaches around this. I know I've given you a bunch today, and maybe too much, but I'd love to hear what people are saying.
Yeah. So we a lot of people, there's some comments about really liking your Winston Churchill quote. So that was one there that they commented on. But just some other things, talking about the domain content and working a little bit with that and really liking the idea of the domain area. Barbara Stewart is saying that her domain would be financial services professionals. However, she's recently read recently led strengths workshops with staffing firms and hair salons.
Yeah.
So there's a diversity between those three areas. Any other thoughts on the domain part and recognizing the different domains?
Yeah, I think you got to decide at some level. Gosh, if you want to be coaching people to be world class, I think you got to have that domain expertise, right? I think there's stages along the way. Like for some people, like some people just naturally love working with newcomers, right? You're part of the welcome wagon. You're part of, you like orienting the new people. So it could be that the work that you're doing, you don't really need domain expertise. You're just introducing people to strengths and helping people with that talent, that basic kind of talent identification and awareness piece. I think over time, though, if you, as a strengths coach, I think that at least there'll be a certain segment of our strengths coaching population that'll really be saying, gosh, how do I specialize? How do I come up with a differentiated brand here where I've got an area of expertise? And I think it's that combination of really understanding talent and the development of talent and really having domain expertise in a particular way. And I think that's going to be integral to somebody having a really highly differentiated brand, a real high, having a brand that's going to make them successful in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm. We also have a couple of comments back and forth on one similar topic here, so I'll kind of pull all the things together and ask it as one larger question. But
yeah,
going back to the inclusion of vision, mission, and purpose.
Yeah.
And a lot of folks are saying that they get some pushback on that, and it's oftentimes people aren't sure how to actually create a mission, purpose, and vision. It's a great aspect that they can use, but kind of give us a little more information about those three.
Yeah, I think on that, sometimes, and gosh, over the years, I've read a million books about mission and purpose and defining those, books that were faith-based, books that were business-based kind of books, and so there's just a million approaches. A lot of, at least in a business context, a lot of them are related to strategy development. I think sometimes people have sort of an inherent sense of mission. And I think that really develops, particularly as people's self-awareness grows, and they know more about themselves. I think oftentimes when people do the CliftonStrengths Finder and they start to understand and appreciate their own talents, there's that sense of, gosh, this is what I'm made for. This is what I'm called to do. This is what I'm made for, and people have that it helps facilitate people's sense of mission and purpose. I think the on-ramp to that sometimes for people is thinking about their goals and outcomes. One of the things we do at Gallup, for instance, is every year we ask people to write out their goals for the year. One of the things I started about 23 years ago, this starts to date me, but about 23 years ago, myself and two friends started a goal-setting group. And every year for the last 23 years, we do goals for the quarter, we do goals for the year, we have weekly promises inside of that. I like to tell people that's what people who have high focus, I'm focus number 2, that's what people that have high focus do for fun, is set goals. But I will tell you that I think oftentimes goals and outcomes are sort of the on-ramp for mission and purpose. It gives us that sense of direction and helps us, when confronting mission and purpose seems big or grandiose or a little amorphous, that thinking about goals and outcomes in sort of some time period can help kind of get us on the court with that.
Great.
Yeah.
I think that kind of wraps up our time here. We're getting about 45 minutes in, so we're going to go ahead and wrap it up here. Thank you, Dean, very much for joining us. Any closing thoughts or comments?
No, yes, I guess my closing thought is, gosh, I love getting feedback, and I love hearing your thoughts and how this connects with you. My email address is dean_jones@gallup.com. If you're watching the broadcast, either live or recorded, and you've got some thoughts about this, I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to shoot me an email.
Great. Thank you, Dean. We did have just a little apology. We had our Spreaker account stop recognizing our microphones there for a little bit in the middle. I think we had a couple of people listening on Spreaker, but we'll get that fixed. It was back live, so hopefully you folks are able to hear the last half of the show. But we'll remind everyone to take full advantage of the resources we have available at GallupStrengthsCenter.com. Additionally, if you'd like to send us your questions or comments or would like to be a guest blogger on our coaches site, email us at coaching@gallup.com. You can also catch the recorded audio and video of this show and all past webcasts, as well as our link to our Facebook and YouTube page over at coaching.gallup.com. We invite you to join us on February 5th for Gallup's next Call to Coach webcast. And this summer, I don't know if Jim's talked about this yet, but this summer, Gallup will hold the first ever CliftonStrengths Summit here in Omaha, Nebraska. We are now just finalizing the details, but save the dates of July 18th through 20th and make plans to be in Omaha for this exciting event. More details will be released on that soon. That's all for today. We look forward to connecting with you again very soon. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye, everyone.